Ever heard of a game called Junie? Yeah, I hear talked about quite a bit. Okay, not the point. It's one of those oldsy games that everyone should play at least once. Junie is one of my favorite indie games, and I was never able to quite forget it. But I'm not here today to gush about Junie. Instead, I'm looking at the other games Junie's developer made. flOw and flOw. Okay, these guys are not only called that game company, but their first two games also have almost the exact same title. They are not great with names. Speaking of which, I always love the name That Game Company. It's so hilariously non-specific. I'm just waiting around for them to make a game called That Game. That Game Company's new game looks cool too. Only problem, Sky's only going to be on iOS. Can we get a PS4 version, please? But I digress. I've been meaning to make a video on flOw for quite a while. I was going to, but things kept coming up that I wanted to do more, so this game has just been sitting on my PS4 hard drive for like a year and a half. Not so much with flOw though. I only recently bought it on sale for like $2, so I figured I'd give this one a shot too. But I actually have some prior experience with flOw. I not only played a demo on PS2 back in the day, but I played flOw in a museum of all things. In 2012, the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. had an exhibit called The Art of Video Games. In it, they chronicled the evolution of video games, from the Atari all the way up to the PS3. They showed classic games like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Mario Bros. 3, as well as newer games like Portal, Uncharted 2, and flOw. Summer of 2012, my family and I went on a trip to Washington, D.C. and Bethany Beach in Delaware, and I made sure we stopped to see this at some point. It was such a surreal experience seeing so many games that I'd actually played or at least heard of in an actual art museum. Only 5 games in the exhibit were playable though. I got to play Super Mario Bros. And flOw in an actual museum. How cool is that? I can tell the rest of my family was kinda bored, but I was just trying to soak all this in. Don't ask me about the rest of the trip though, I don't remember most of it. I was mostly playing Gravity Rush at the time. Tangent aside, my first experience with flOw was playing in an art museum. Hell yeah, I'm talking about that. flOw was featured in that exhibit as well, but I didn't know what it was at the time. Ever since that day at the museum, I always wanted to play flOw myself, but I just never got around to it. While we're at it, let's take a look at flOw as well. These games may have been in a museum a few years ago, but let's see how well they hold up. flOw came out first, so I'll start with that. In flOw, you play as a microscopic creature. You use the gyroscope to swim around and eat other creatures. As you eat more and more, you keep growing and delve deeper into the void. Eventually, you evolve and become progressively stronger creatures. And that's pretty much all there is to it. There are enemies that can damage you and send you back up a layer, but they're typically an annoyance at worst. This isn't the kind of game you can die in. The game is pretty samey the whole way through, nothing else really happens to shake things up. There is DLC for $2 that lets you play as a few more creatures, but the DLC only lasts for like 20 minutes. You aren't really missing much, but for an extra $2 you get a bit more variety, so you might as well get the DLC. What's baffling to me is that you can only control this game with a gyroscope, instead of, you know, the analog stick. The gyro controls feel pretty arbitrary and don't really add much. It just makes the game feel more awkward than anything. Even by the end of the game, I still didn't feel like I had complete control over my creature. I get they were going for something different, and this is a very unique game, but it would have been way more enjoyable if you could control it like any other game. There isn't much music in flOw either. Well, there is music, but it feels more like ambient background sounds and not really music per se. But these flaws almost feel intentional. You're playing as this microscopic organism, and moving around is awkward because of the gyro controls. Just like how moving around flagellum is probably awkward for an organism like this. What would you even hear down there? Probably very little, or possibly even nothing. Maybe it's calm and quiet. The visual is almost psychedelic and gives it this nearly alien, esoteric feel to it. It's kind of hard to have a full grasp of what's going on, and it's incredibly simple all the same. As complex as humans are, it's hard for us to relate to something like what happens in flOw. It's a very strange and simple game, but microscopic life is a strange yet simple one, and that's beautiful in its own way. flOw felt like an alien experience, but in a good way. If that game company was trying to capture the feeling of microscopic life, they nailed it. The whole game is kind of awkward and clunky, but it's also very simplistic and brainless. The game feels like you're playing as something you'd see under a microscope, and has this otherworldly vibe that comes with microscopic life. And because everything's microscopic, this could take place anywhere, similar to how it would feel with the Vita and PSP versions. It could be on your desk, it could be on an apple about to be eaten, it could be on Hitler's mustache, it could even be right on top of that subscribe. As an experience, this was a pretty interesting and enjoyable time. For a little over an hour, you get a taste of microscopic life. But as a game, it feels like an experiment more than anything. If you're into more artsy games, you'll probably enjoy flOw. As for the average Joe that wants a short, relaxing experience, this might be worth your time at least once. For $6, this isn't half bad, and for an extra $2, you can get a bit more gameplay and variety with the expansion. If you buy it once, you get it on PS3, PS4, and Vita. I played on PS4, but play whatever you're most comfortable with. Overall, flOw is a pretty unique game that doesn't really try to be anything else. It has its flaws, but they almost feel intentional to simulate what it feels like to be a microscopic organism. It's kind of strange and clunky, but if you're into more oldie games, you might really enjoy it. Moving on to flOw, this one was something else. In this game, you play as the wind. Yeah, every kid's dream right here. Like, kids just sitting there playing, I don't know, Sonic, and he's just like, yeah. You press any button to move forward and use the gyroscope to steer. All you do is gather up flower petals and watch the beautiful scenery unfold. And this is a very pretty game, especially on PS4. Like flOw is an incredibly simple game. This isn't really so much about being engaged, it's more about sitting back and taking in the scenery while peaceful music plays. At the end of each level, you even get these beautiful landscapes that look like something a nature photographer would take. They almost feel like animated paintings in a way. I applied just a regular watercolor filter in GIMP, and seriously, these landscapes are living paintings without all the brush strokes. The environments in this game are just stunning to look at. Like flOw, I really wish you could steal with the analog stick, at least as an option. It's not that big of a deal, but it still makes the game feel a little clunky and doesn't really add much. flOw does get a bit repetitive by the end, but by that point it quickly does something different and then it's over. It had a bit of a nature versus technology theme by the end as well, but I'm not too sure how to interpret this. Maybe nature and technology can coexist? Like all, the game's open to interpretation, which has its own appeal. flOw is really one of those games you just have to play for yourself. It's great to just sit back and relax with for an hour or two. I finished it in a little over an hour, but flOw is more about the experience. What you get out of it will likely be different for each person, but that's flOw as an experience. As a game, it's kind of like the anti-game. There's no enemies to fight, no challenge, no obstacles, no story other than a few cityscape images that are probably loading screens, no tutorials, not really a whole lot we typically associate with video games. By stripping away things that make games games, it makes flOw really unique in that way. But as a game, it does get pretty repetitious pretty quickly. There isn't much new introduced throughout the game, you're mostly doing the same thing the whole time. But once it starts to get really interesting, it's over. But that's flOw as a game, and it's not really going through an experience as a game. It's going through an experience more as a form of interactive media, which is essentially what a game is, but hopefully you know what I mean. If you look at flOw as a game, you won't really get much out of it. It's a short, repetitive game with pretty visuals and music that ends as soon as it gets interesting. But as an experience, it's an enjoyable, relaxing time to just sit back and watch the pretty visuals unfold. And if you want to give this one a shot, that's an important distinction to get the full enjoyment out of it. Whether or not that's your thing, I went in expecting an interactive experience and not so much a game, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Hopefully you do too. The first two games from that game company were a really enjoyable time. As games, they have their issues, but as experiences, they both felt unique in their own ways. flOw was this almost alien experience into the world of microscopic life, and flOw was a serene one that lets the player take in the pretty visuals. As experiences, they're both worth your time for $8 a piece, but as games, they can be a bit shallow. They both feel a bit more about the experience rather than being a game. Not everyone would be into that sort of thing, but when thought of as interactive experiences and not so much games, they feel really unique. flOw is the better of the two, but flOw is still an enjoyable time if you're willing to take the plunge. Definitely not a bad way to spend a Saturday. Now, before anyone asks if I'm doing Journey, I will make a video on Journey. Eventually. Journey is something truly special, and I want to make sure I can do it justice first. But back to flOw and flOw, they're both on PS3, PS4, and Vita, and buying one version gets you all three to play, so play whatever you're most comfortable with. flOw is also on PSV, but it's harder to recommend that version because it lacks cross-buy. flOw even has an iOS version for those who like to paint with cheese. I mean, the iOS version works well enough, but why? This has been Flame Guy, and regardless of what you play these games on, I hope you have an enjoyable experience like I did. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all next mission.